Yo, it's Austin. It's been over a year since Final Fantasy XV graced us with its weird, terrible, unfinished, buggy mess that I still kind of loved, but that's okay, because it's been a year. We've gotten updates, we've gotten all the season pass stuff, the extended universe of Final Fantasy XV continues to grow, so I thought I would give it a little bit of a progress report. Big warning, there will be big spoilers in this video, so if you haven't finished 15 yet, I recommend doing that. Or if you don't really care and want to see what everything's about, feel free to hang with me. But if not, turn around. This is your last chance. You gone? Okay. So a lot happens in Final Fantasy XV. The game that I played back in 2016 had a lot of gaps in the story, followed with a few plot holes, unfinished character arcs, fucking Noctis dying for some reason. I told you, spoilers. But overall, I still found myself pulling away from the experience with a positive outlook. After all, it's hard to watch that final cinematic and be like, ugh, that was dumb. I have no soul and the ending made me feel nothing. Fucking nothing! My fondness for Final Fantasy XV has only grown with time, even with all of the flaws. But with all of the updates comes more and more things to love, or at least that's the ideal. It hasn't all been a juicy Final Fantasy Coleman grilled sponsored cheeseburger. Please buy Coleman products. Some of it was fucking Cindy salad in a jar. Kinda stale and weird. But that's okay, because I'd rather have something than nothing, and Final Fantasy XV in that regard delivered. So let's begin with the season pass, but first I gotta tell you guys, I'm a little mad. I'm a little mad that this big motherfucker right here didn't have the season pass. It's ridiculous. I paid $1 million for this, and I like it. So let's start with the very first piece of DLC and everybody's favorite cup noodle salesman, Gladiolus. We're close. Episode Gladiolus was the first piece of DLC to hit outside of the holiday festival, which I totally missed out on. Which sucks, but apparently I didn't miss out on too much. I wasn't expecting some of the DLC to be timed, which in the scheme of everything doesn't really make sense from a consumer standpoint. It needlessly punishes people for waiting or taking their time, but okay. Episode Gladio. I don't like it. After chapter 6, Gladiolus got beat up a little bit. Like, less so than bosses have done to him in my normal playthrough, but enough to hit that ego. Sad enough that he couldn't properly defend the king, Gladio farts out of the party in a big manner that literally screamed, "Coming in future DLC." So Gladio hits up Troy Baker and is like, hey, I need to get stronger, and I heard something about a place you can go to train to become the true king's shield or something. So he goes off to an admittedly beautiful looking cave and then does exactly that by fighting good old Gilgamesh. And that's it. Episode Gladio launched alongside the Verse 2 update, which we will talk about later, but ultimately I feel like this part of the season pass falls really short. Limiting the character development that Gladio goes through to just him wanting to get stronger for Noctis feels like they kinda just rushed it out of the door. But it's even more unfortunate because the gameplay side of things also kinda just falls flat. While Final Fantasy XV never really had the best of control schemes, Gladio's greatsword wielding is a lot of mashing, swinging, and praying. Just a lot of that. Episode Gladio is super glitchy, even months after release. It's barely 2 hours long. The final encounter with Gilgamesh, while neat, is ultimately... We've also got ourselves easily the worst incarnation of Gilgamesh I've ever seen, with a subpar version of Battle on the Big Bridge. Gladio feels like they just needed a thing out ASAP, which is why I'm glad they took their time with the next few episodes. The best part of this DLC is probably the unlockable shirtless costume, which, I mean, someone might like this. You know who you are. It would be another 3 months before we would receive the next major DLC, episode Prompto, and boy am I glad it took some time. Remember that part in chapter 11 when Noctis is all like... And then like 4 hours later we find him all tied up and sad and shit? Well, as one would expect, episode Prompto fills in that gap. After being knocked off the train, Prompto is wandering the snowy wastelands of Niflheim in one of those make the player go slow because emotions kind of segments before nearly passing out. Prompto is picked up by Magitech troopers and is confronted by Arden, who basically drops lore on Prompto about what he really is. From here, by progressing and finding audio logs, both the player and Prompto find out that the boy is a failed Magitech soldier, which we already knew. From there, we blow up a bunch of stuff, escape the facility on the snowmobile level from Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, except like 10 times jankier, meet up with resident second best girl Aranea, and then blow up a big monkey and more things. But dude, they nailed it. A brand new aesthetic on the engine thanks to a very snow-heavy Niflheim, a beautiful soundtrack done by Naoshi Mitsuda of Final Fantasy XI, 13-2, and Parasite Eve 2, a new gameplay style that completely surprised me considering Noctis and Gladio's controls, and most importantly, wonderfully choreographed full-length cinematics to flesh out the characters. While Gladio went a little into it, certain scenes in episode Prompto went all out. The scenes of Prompto struggling with hallucinations, the long-winded inspirational conversation between him and Aranea, an exciting conclusion straight out of a first-person shooter. These are things that made me feel a little mixed, but we'll get into that later on. I'll admit, I was a little apprehensive when I heard that episode Prompto played like a slightly janky shooter, but you know what? Considering everything with Final Fantasy XV's problematic Luminous engine, I'd say they pulled it off. Well, for the most part. I had a few glitches, such as being completely unable to do anything in the final vault without restarting, or the end credits being this. Had to, look up the ending, but I got this sick blurred out camera. I'm glad they pulled episode Prompto out after the pretty boring episode Gladio. Aranea and Prompto's dynamic was a fun one, and the slightly open world aspect to the winter world gave me a little Coleman branded faith in what was to come.
Couldn't have done it without you, girl.
It wouldn't be until December that we would get the final piece of Season Pass DLC with episode Ignis. The trailers came out depicting Alticia under raid and Ignis being a strong buff boy punching things and shit. The trailer might have gone a little bit into the spoiler territory too much, but still got me hyped. Episode Ignis feels like a fever dream. There are moments throughout this large-scaled DLC that made me think that it was a completely different product than Final Fantasy XV. Considering Ignis came out over a year after 15, though, it makes sense. The development teams at this point have gotten used to the engine, the characters, and the world. The writing is top-notch, the twists here are in check, the cinematics are the best that 15 has to offer. Ignis is not only uniquely controllable, but also gets a hookshot that lets him blast around on the rooftops at really fast speeds. In fact, Ignis's DLC kind of plays like an insane action movie. It's like Spider-Man 2. Considering the implications of his DLC hinted at in the main game with our favorite chef becoming blind, I'm happy that the gameplay is just as solid as the gaps being filled. A crazy boat chase, fast-paced elemental dagger combos, using his hookshot to deal devastating blows, retaking parts of Alticia back from the Empire, teaming up with Ravis, it all just feels so good! The guest composer on this episode is none other than my boy Yasunori Mitsuda. And I mean, fuck, they added a second ending for no reason. Like, considering that this DLC takes place in the middle of the game, they literally didn't need to work in the effort to have a completely alternative ending, but fuck it, I guess. The boss fights are thrilling, including a duel against Ravis, angry over his sister Luna's death. There's even a super boss fight, which is technically the most difficult in the game, where Noctis is fighting Ignis over vegetables. And he's like casting death and shit. Jeez, dude. The implications of Ignis knowing of Noctis' fate after putting on the Ring of the Lucy, the fact that he went all out, sacrificed his body simply to protect his friend, add all of this up with the extended universe and the main game, and Jesus Christ, episode Ignis is a tearjerker. And this pisses me off, like, a lot. I love this DLC. I really enjoy Final Fantasy XV, but imagining 15 with the cutscene and game quality of episode Prompto and Ignis it just makes me wish they pushed the game back another year. These are things that should have been in the game from the start. These are cinematics on par with the choreography of something like Xenoblade Chronicles 2. The Square Enix of yesteryear would have had all of this in the game from the get-go, and it's just a crying shame that modern Square Enix kept all of the good stuff behind microtransactions. Granted, that's a hot take that completely discounts and shrugs off the development cycle of 15, but it kinda sucks knowing that this is what they were capable of. All of that aside though, episode Ignis fills in the gaps of what is arguably one of the most interesting and important gaps in the story. It presents a fun new style of combat, it showed me what a finished version of Final Fantasy XV could potentially look like, and to top it all off, it made me fall in love with Ignis, the character. And in that sense, the season pass did its job, but we ain't done yet. The last part of the Final Fantasy XV Season Pass, and probably the biggest surprise, was the multiplayer expansion Comrades. It was good. It was real good. Comrades surprised me. Sure, it was filled with awful server issues at launch, party matchmaking options are about as good as you would expect from a Japanese game. Loading times are 100 years each, and sometimes it glitched out to the point where I had to hard reset it. A few of those things got patched with time, but that doesn't change the fact that it's basically just 4-player Monster Hunter Final Fantasy kill time. In that sense, fuck dude, it's a good time. Grab yourself some friends, a few cup noodles and brews, and get to work.
Yeah.
Comrades takes place in the gap between chapter 13 and 14, where Noctis is being a baby crystal boy. He's gotta grow in the Bahamut womb to become a true Final Fantasy protagonist. So it's up to us and the other members of the Kingsglaive to power up the faltering areas of Eos. Make your character like my blue-haired cutie and embark on missions. There's something very simple and pure about all of this. The story is basically in the background, but in case you were wondering, spoilers, you find out at the end of the story that the character you made is a member of the group of traders from the, wait for it, movie Kingsglaive. Yes, it came back here. I mean, some of the damned characters are NPCs in the game even, like, okay. The only thing that disappoints me is the fact that the base multiplayer expansion was pretty bare bones. But as of this writing, they've actually made an expansion to the expansion, so I guess they're gonna keep updating it. I will say, accepting your fate as traitor and relegating yourself as fodder near the end is a pretty neat twist. But also, so is fighting fucking Bahamut. It's a normal fight in single player, but when you launch the multiplayer version, it turns into the most bullshit MMO every spot on the map means you're gonna fucking die fight that you can think of. As an MMO, Comrades is a little lacking, but I feel like with time, it's gonna turn into something really special. Even if the final cinematic has you just kinda barely tucked into the background there. Also, the Prompto battle is mean because he turns you into stone and takes a selfie. Fucking dick. Now, alongside all of the paid content, Final Fantasy XV has had so many updates and free things come out that it's really hard to keep track of, but I'm sure as hell gonna try, so let's look at that. I don't think I've seen a video game change fundamentally with patches and updates as much as I have with Final Fantasy XV. Okay, maybe 14. It's not even that it wasn't expected from the initial announcements, it's just wild to me that some of the additions are things I didn't expect, such as training at the campsite with Aranea, switching party members in combat, turning the Regalia into a fucking monster truck that can jump. These are all weird and appreciated, but none really hit that weird factor for me quite like the Assassin's Creed crossover. And I guess now the Tomb Raider one, still bringing it. They're still bringing it. I was expecting a bunch of nothing for the Assassin's Creed downloadable content, but I ended up being relatively surprised because it actually seems to be canon. It all involves that one General Loki. Yeah, remember Loki? Is that Loki? This game's out of fucking control. So, the Assassin's Festival is taking place in Lestalem. On the way over, the boys loudly proclaim,
Ooh, look at all these posters!
It's happening, isn't it? It's really happening. The two of them happen to be rather fond of the Assassin's Creed series.
Before embarking on a bunch of hijinks. The Empire attacks and they want the prince, blah blah blah. In terms of adding things to Final Fantasy XV, it doesn't do too much, but it sure was entertaining. The biggest surprise here is how much effort they put in to make things feel all Assassin's Creed-y. While it's absolutely way stiffer than any AC game, it was neat to see this kind of variety again. It reminded me of the old PlayStation 1 days of Final Fantasy, where going to a city would see the party engage in a wild event like the Golden Saucer or the Hunters Festival in Final Fantasy IX. 15 needed more of these fun and silly diversions to make the main party feel like bonded brothers, but the Assassin's Creed DLC will have to do. Even if it hurts. Let's see what else we got. There's chapter 13, verse 2, where you can now play through it with Gladio and blind Ignis.
Or it may be one of the Empire's alternative facts.
Hey, political satire. Neat. This serves as a lore dump for Ravis and a couple other things, but even with episode Ignis, it's still not enough to make his character make sense. It's okay, it's fine. Oh, and don't forget about when they randomly added like 15 minutes of cutscenes into chapter 12. Yeah, like actually. Remember that part when you find out that Gentiana is Shiva and she talks to Noctis? Well, now she can talk to him more. She tells you about Odin and the summons and their previous lore, which is Nido. The summons in 15 were kinda just there, so it's nice to see them fleshed out. Then there's Luna. Yes, mini Luna cutscenes. I think this new event had more Luna than base Final Fantasy XV, which is wild, but still. We learn a lot about her character, her love for Noctis, their relationship, her relationship with Ravus, but still, it's not enough for me to understand Ravus. What's that about, Tabata? Come on, dog! And well, those are all of the major free patches for Final Fantasy 15. But honestly, with the way things keep evolving, I'm sure it's not the last. I just hope they change whatever is causing frequent loading screens anytime I'm driving around. Like, what? The Royal Edition of 15 simultaneously excites and upsets me. From one angle, we finally got, as of this writing, the definitive edition of Final Fantasy 15. But on the flip side, I, the fanboy, have poured so much money into this game that I'm kind of ashamed. The Ultimate Collector set, which should have been called the Ultima Edition, ran for about $270. It came with all of these things, but no season pass. That means that the newly released Royal Edition content was also not included in that massive price I paid, and frankly, it's kind of insulting. Also worth noting is that upgrading digitally to the Royal Pack does not include the Season Pass DLC either, just the Royal specific editions, which are as follows: a revamped final dungeon, more final bosses, some cutscenes adding more context to the ending of the game, better combat with the armature system, fucking piloting the boat. Now, I won't sit here and disregard the content, but as a huge supporter of the franchise, I can't help but feel that I've been swindled. The 15 I pulled out of this big motherfucker a year and a half ago was nowhere near the game we have now, and I've only had to pay more for it. However, I do recommend playing the new stuff, cause it's pretty freaking good. I'm just a little salty, even if the boat's dumb. Also, the PC version of Final Fantasy 15's out, and it's the best version. And it has mod support coming, what the fuck? Well, that's all for Final Fantasy 15, but we're not done. The expanded universe of 15 continues to grow at a surprisingly alarming pace, so let's go ahead and get started with that, with the mobile games. The expanded 15 universe sure is weird. When I first heard about that a new Empire mobile game, I was so confused. Those beautiful trailers of Noct in the game fighting dudes for some reason, beautiful models inserted into the action, fucking fan service all over the place. I was like, excuse me? But hey, this is made by the people who made Game of War, so it's shit. I think everyone knows this, but in case you didn't, this is one of those mobile games designed to be a nothing game with no gameplay in the slightest. You just spend money and resources and real-life money to have a bigger Eween. It's kinda weird that Square Enix would toss their most notorious franchise into the hands of a company like Machine Zone, but that's the world we live in now, I guess. Also on mobile, we've got Pocket Edition, and well, I actually really like it. TLDR, they made the entire story of Final Fantasy 15 a premium quality mobile game, and there's a lot to talk about. So much so that I want to make a video on that by itself, so watch out for that. All I can say is don't dismiss little onion-headed Noctis, because the Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance-styled Final Fantasy 15 demake is something that is worth your time. What else? Let's see. Oh yeah, A King's Tale. I absolutely love the premise of this. King Regis is making up bedtime stories to little baby Noct of his adventures. It's such a cute setup, but the game is kind of just a wet fart. It's a bad beat 'em up, just move on. Then we've also got both Justice Monsters 5 and King's Knight, the mini games inside of 15, the latter of which Noctis and Prompto won't shut the fuck up about.
You ready to rumble, Noct?
In King's Knight? Oh yeah.
I'm game.
Monsters has been shut down already, and King's Knight has 2 months left. Sick. And that's pretty much all we got game-wise, but it seems like we're just starting to enter the deep end. Recently, it was revealed that Final Fantasy 15 is gonna get another season pass, with 4 more episodes, including a new ending. Episodes Arden, Aranea, Luna, and Noctis. I can only theorize what any of these will be about, but it seems to me like I'm gonna have to make another update video next year. Final Fantasy 15 truly is the game that will never end. But before we go, I've got one more thing to talk about. I hope you didn't think I was gonna forget about the only game in this entire video that even matters. Monsters of the Deep. What originally started as VR looking at Cindy's tits as Prompto simulator eventually changed into Monsters of the Deep Final Fantasy 15, where you can instead look at Cindy's ass. If you own a PlayStation VR, you owe it to yourself to experience one of the most unique and ridiculous VR games that system has. If you got one and are a Final Fantasy fan, just fucking go buy it. Sure, it's janky, but it's fishing. It's shooting fish. It's making an OC. It's hanging out with the boys in ugly-ass textures because the PlayStation 4 is super inferior to the Vive. It's just good, okay? Game of the Year 2017, fuck Danganronpa. I just hope you aren't scared easily. You go away! You go away and you never come back. Fuck! Every time! Hey, thank you so much for watching. That's year 1 of Final Fantasy 15 complete, another to go. Special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters. We finished Wild Arms 3 and we're on to Goemon and on to something else new soon, so you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Eruption. And hey, listen, click that bell. YouTube's being a butt lately and it really helps the channel out, especially if you don't want to miss any of my videos, so, you know, give it a shot. Stick around. Maybe you'll like some of the things, I don't know.